are perpetuating the conditions under which it's inevitable that new variants like Omicron would develop and become a problem. People Before Profit in December of last year put a motion on the Dáil order paper calling for the government to support the global campaign for a TRIPS waiver on COVID vaccines in order that we could get vaccines to the poorer countries and the developing world, precisely because if we didn't, the likelihood of new variants emerging was almost certain. We put that motion even before Delta emerged. And all of the scientists, anybody who knows about the evolution of viruses, have been saying for over a year, if you don't get the vaccine out and lift restrictions on vaccine production to everywhere in the world, then variants would emerge, which would then become a problem. And the chickens have come home to roost on the utterly disgraceful position of the European Union, supported by the Irish government, in refusing to take that action. And they need to be held to account for that decision. Time and time again, Micheál Martin, when we've questioned them about this, Micheál Martin, Leo Varadkar have defended the EU Commission's position. And we even have a situation now where the European Parliament has voted on successive occasions calling for the TRIPS waiver on vaccine intellectual property in order to allow vaccines to be produced across the world, and the EU Commission is blocking it, and the Irish government have defended that position. So it is absolute sabotage of the efforts we need to combat the pandemic and to reduce the likelihood of variants like Omicron emerging. So we want to just reiterate that call once again. If the government are serious about dealing with the ongoing threat of the pandemic and now of variants like Omicron, they need to reverse this disgraceful position and support the campaign for the TRIPS waiver on COVID vaccine production. The other thing just to say briefly is that, and it's kind of linked to that point, that it is really pretty disgraceful to essentially punish South Africa as the country that actually shared the information and identified Omicron with a travel ban, when without them we wouldn't even know about Omicron. And it makes no sense because Omicron is certainly present all across Europe. So the idea of particularly targeting and punishing South Africa or African countries who've shared that information and who are actually dealing with the consequences of the failure of the European Union to give the waiver, the TRIPS waiver on vaccine production, to then punish them. It is really deeply hypocritical for the Irish government to punish them in that way. And to be honest, it's a sort of way of the government deflecting away from its own responsibilities in refusing to support the People's Vaccine Campaign to lift the waiver and indeed to prepare our health services and other key infrastructure for dealing with further waves of COVID-19. So the government should really stop the hypocrisy. If they're serious about preparing us or dealing with the threat of Omicron, the ongoing pandemic, they should support the TRIPS waiver and stop the hypocrisy on punishing countries like South Africa, who are actually doing us a big favour in identifying this variant.
I'm just going to talk briefly about our workplace ventilation COVID-19 Bill 2021, which will be debated tomorrow morning in the Dáil and which will be voted on tomorrow night. We're very happy to announce that now the bill has the support of the Irish Congress of Trade Unions. That support comes on top of the support of Sinn Féin, of Labour and of the Social Democrats. And we're urging people to contact government TDs in particular to ask them to vote in favour of this bill tomorrow. It is scandalous that we're now almost 2 years into a pandemic. The majority of that period we have known that airborne transmission is a crucial way that COVID is spread, and yet we have no legally enforceable standards in relation to the right of workers to have clean air. So our bill is rectifying that by giving workers and therefore students in schools, because that's also a workplace, the right to clean air. If it was passed and if it was rapidly implemented, it would make a real difference in terms of the fight against COVID. It would mean that we'd have CO2 monitors in pubs, in restaurants. It would mean CO2 monitors in every classroom rather than just a few classrooms. And it would mean and require HEPA filters in classrooms and in public buildings across the country. And it would make a huge difference in terms of slashing the transmission of COVID, as those who were at our press event yesterday will have heard from the experts in terms of what it can do. So we haven't heard from the government yet what their attitude is towards this bill. Obviously, maybe the deepest irony of all would be if they were to use their more recent tactic to say that, well, we're going to delay your bills by 6 months or 9 months in the context of a pandemic. So really it'll be up to the government. Are they going to vote in favour of the right to clean air and then put the resources behind that to ensure that that can take place, or will they object to clean air, vote against workers having the right to clean air at a time of a pandemic which is crucially airborne? So we have to see what the government position tomorrow will be.
Thanks, Paul. So, I just want to say a few words on the issue of rents and the question of rent caps. The government say that they're bringing in rent cap legislation, that they're going to cap rents at 2% or the rate of inflation, whichever is lower. But information has emerged this morning which indicates that there could be significant loopholes in this legislation. I see that the Irish Independent is reporting that in a case where a landlord has not implemented a rent increase in recent years, that landlord will be legally entitled to increase rents by 2% plus what was foregone by the landlord in previous years, and have raised the scenario where for some tenants rent could increase by in the region of 6% next year. Now, we've made the point previously that this is a landlord's government, that both Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are chock-a-block full of landlords in the ranks of their own parliamentary parties, and that where an outcry from society forces them to bring in legislation which might protect tenants, it tends to be reluctantly on their part, and then full of loopholes, exemptions, get-out clauses. And it appears that this is about to happen once again. We intend to question the Taoiseach, question the Minister, question the government about this. We're challenging them to defend this legislation and explain that this is not the case, but it certainly seems to be the case. Of course, what is necessary is not a 2% rent cap, is at the very least, a freezing of rents. And as I say, a freezing of rents without get-out clauses, exemptions, backdoors or loopholes. So this will be an important issue on the floor of the Dáil this week.
Okay.
But I think it's almost certain, and there's been pretty much acknowledgement, that Omicron is here and it's present all across the world. It's been identified in multiple countries in Europe and other countries in the world. In fact, we don't really even know where it originated. The only reason we know about it is because of the state-of-the-art genomic sequencing that the South Africans have, that they've identified it. To be honest, it's totally meaningless. It's gesture politics to talk about a travel ban for African countries. And in any event, the real issue is that we can prevent or minimise the likelihood of new variants emerging if we vaccinate the world. And this is a message that the scientists and the public health people and ourselves have been putting across for over a year. Unless you get the vaccines out to countries that are crying out for those vaccines and have the ability to produce them themselves if they are given the vaccine technology by the big pharmaceutical companies. And outrageously, the European Union in particular actively supported by the Irish government, has blocked the waiver, the TRIPS waiver, for vaccine production that would allow countries like South Africa, India and other countries to produce vaccines in large quantities where those countries are crying out for it. So that's what we need to do. The World Health Organization have said it. It is notable that Mike Ryan has argued against the travel ban, and indeed has said it's unhelpful because actually it's punishing South Africa, who are assisting the world in identifying this variant and then allowing us to try and cope with it. So it's completely counterproductive, it's hypocritical, and it will be ineffective.
So just on the details of it, the ban, so to speak, is people who arrive here from those countries have to quarantine until they get to negative PCR tests for a period. So you're saying that requirement should be removed from those countries, or should it be enforced on every arrival?
I'm saying there shouldn't be a travel ban. I think it's quite reasonable to talk about increasing testing generally if there's concerns. But the idea that there's a specific travel ban targeted at a few countries in Africa because South Africa identified Omicron is counterproductive, and it amounts to punishing South Africa for actually assisting the world in identifying this new variant.
Would you classify it as a travel ban? How is it banned?
Because they're saying there will be no travel from South Africa or any of those countries. That's what they're doing. Just to be clear, it's a travel ban from those countries. If we're talking about increased testing generally for people coming into the country, that's an entirely reasonable thing to do. But of course, crucially, we need the follow-up with public health teams and passenger locator forms and all that kind of stuff in order to identify cases that may be identified, so that we have proper follow-up on them. But the idea there'll be a specific ban imposed on a few countries when Omicron is clearly present right across the world is simply amounts to punishing South Africa for doing the world a favour in identifying this new variant.
Fair enough. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks a lot.